All right, welcome back here to The Hill on News Nation. The war between Israel and Hamas is now shaping the 2024 presidential race. Among the most vocal on the Republican side is the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. Earlier today, I spoke with the governor about the war, his thoughts on the mess in Congress, and Donald Trump. A lot going on in the world. We obviously want to start on Israel and the ongoings in the Middle East. You, of course, want to be the next commander-in-chief. The current one is on his way back from Israel. I'm wondering if you give President Biden credit for going and how you view his trip in Israel over the last 24 hours or so.
Well, I would say he needs to do a couple things that he hasn't done yet. One is he needs to impose financial sanctions on Iran to the maximum extent allowable under law. Iran ultimately orchestrated and funded this. Groups like Hamas and Hezbollah would not be able to function the way they do without the patronage of the Iranians. I think Biden still holds out hope that there can be a rapprochement with the Iranians. That is not going to happen. So I would do that. Second thing, I would back Israel publicly, which he has done. But I think privately they're urging more restraint. And to me, this has to end with Hamas suffering an unconditional defeat. Israel cannot live like this, where they suffered the most significant attack against Jews since the Holocaust, and act like that's something that could just happen again in the future. So they have to take care of that. I would not be urging restraint behind the scenes. I would tell them to get the job done. And then finally, Biden said he's sending $100 million to the Gaza Strip for, quote, humanitarian assistance. The problem with that is Hamas runs the Gaza Strip. That is going to be commandeered by Hamas. And oh, by the way, Hamas is still holding people hostage. They're still holding Americans hostage. I would not send that money. And I've actually challenged all the other Republican presidential candidates step up to the plate and join me in saying, don't send money to Hamas.
You know, you talk about Iran. Senator Lindsey Graham told us on this program last week, I believe, that if there was an escalation, he would let it be known to the Iranians that the Iranian oil infrastructure should be in play. Us targeting the oil fields and the oil infrastructure there in Iran. Are you willing to go that far?
Well, look, as commander-in-chief, you don't have the luxury of the bellicose rhetoric like that. I think that it's in U.S. interest that Israel wins the fight against Hamas. I don't think we necessarily want to instigate a broader war throughout the Middle East. I think that we can put Iran in the box using the leverage that we have without trying to create a major regional conflict. So you got to be judicious. You got to be very measured as the president of the United States. And I think it's easy to say, you know, just start taking out all this stuff around the world. But in reality is, you know, there are second and third order effects that happen to that. Right. But put Iran in the box. I think that that'll make a big difference.
Would you put U.S. troops on the ground, Governor DeSantis, boots on the ground in Israel if you were the commander-in-chief right now?
Not general ground troops, no. I mean, I think there's American hostages. I think it's largely the IDF's handling that. I would have American resources to rescue Americans because I think that that's something that's important you do as commander-in-chief. But ultimately, this is Israel's war.
So special forces in play for you then?
Or others who can be involved in hostage rescue attempts. And there may be something where this is being done by Israel, and that wouldn't be necessary. All that, of course, would be something that would be classified in secret, as it should be. But in terms of the overall conflict, this is Israel's war. They've never asked us to fight their wars for them. We have a longstanding military support relationship. I would continue that, but you wouldn't see U.S. ground troops fighting in Israel if I were president.
President Biden today, when he was in Israel, Governor, talked about an unprecedented package, an unprecedented support package. He said that he would put before Congress potentially by the end of this week. There's the question, and it could potentially be in the neighborhood. There are reports of $100 billion or so, which then brings into play maybe aid for Ukraine. If there is Ukrainian aid in a major support package that is linked to help for Israel, is that something that you would support, and is that something that you think Republicans in this town should support?
Well, I think the Republicans will ensure that it's separate. I think those should be separate debates. I'll have to see. I did see that top line number. I was surprised at that number because if you look, we've done about $158 billion to Israel for its entire history, 75 years, and we've had a strong relationship with them for most of that period of time. And so I'd be interested to see kind of where that money is going. I don't think Israel is requesting anything on that magnitude.
So what's appropriate when it's specific? Yeah, when it's specific to Israel, I know it's just a theoretical number, sir, at this point. But since you're surprised at the $100 billion for
but it matters,
package.
though. I mean, I do think it matters. I mean, we have a Congress that has plunged this country into debt over the last 5 or 6 years in rates that we have never seen before, starting with COVID and continuing to do it. And it's almost like they think that there's never going to be any cost to this. And so I do think the top line number, look, we're going to meet obligations to defend the American people. But, man, throwing out stuff like that. So I want to see what it is. But I think these are separate debates. I think they're separate issues. And I think the Republicans in the Congress will approach it accordingly.
You're a Harvard grad, as you very well know. And there's been a pretty big issue at your former alma mater. Bill Ackman, hedge fund billionaire, made some news where he essentially said, put your name behind it to the students, the pro-Palestinian demonstrators at Harvard University. Put your name behind it, he said, basically, so we on Wall Street know not to hire you. I'm wondering, Governor, if there are those who take part in pro-Palestinian demonstrations, would you hire them to be a part of your administration in Florida? Would you hire them if you end up being the president of the United States?
Well, what I saw was not just pro-Palestinian. I mean, those were pro-Hamas demonstrations. I mean, when the blood wasn't even dry on the Israelis that had been massacred, you have these Harvard students and other people and other universities out celebrating the carnage by Hamas. And so, of course, I would not hire people who have done that. Look, I tell people I'm one of the few guys that got through both Yale and Harvard and came out more conservative than when I went in because these have typically been very liberal places. However, back in my day, it was very liberal, but I would never have saw students that would have been celebrating actual terrorist attacks. And that's what we saw, and they signed their names to letters. Right. He did get it right, and I think we need to start having accountability in academia. These universities have gone totally off the rails. The response to a lot of them have been so tepid when they get all bent out of shape for other issues, and yet this issue, they can't speak out. And I know there's a lot of Jewish students around the country that don't feel like nobody has got their back on these college campuses. I will say this, though, in Florida, you look at the University of Florida's president, Florida State, they came out very strongly, condemned the terrorist attacks, and said that we're going to have positive environments on our campuses for all of our Jewish students. That's the way we roll in Florida, and I was proud to see that.
Governor, you, of course, at one point were Mr. Congressman, and you know what's going on here in Washington with your party right now in the House. I wonder how you feel about it. Are you embarrassed? Are you ashamed? Are you upset? Are you like what's the sentiment, sir, as you watch what's going on in the House with your party?
Well, I was hoping that Jim Jordan would get elected. He has my support. I think he could do a good job. But, what I see is just a contrast between what's going on in D.C. and how we roll in Florida. We don't do political empty calories down here. We don't do the sideshow. We don't do the drama. We just deliver results across the board. And we've been able to do that on so many issues, from paying down debt, cutting taxes, school choice, standing up to the CCP, you name it. Heck, we just brought people back from Israel when everyone else was dragging their feet. We got it done. And I think the problem with what they're doing in D.C. is the drama is not leading to any results. So it's like they're chickens with their head cut off. They can't get their act together. Meanwhile, we've got an open border. We've got rising prices. We've got issues with crime in the streets. And, of course, you now have more instability around the world. And voters want to see results. So I think they need to get their act together and focus on the American people. Stop the palace intrigue and deliver results for your constituents. That's how we've led in Florida. And, oh, by the way, when I'm president, that is the type of framework we're going to work from in D.C.
You mentioned drama. Governor, you have ramped up the attacks against Donald Trump in essentially here the recent weeks. There was a time when you weren't really going after him. You were focusing on yourself and other issues, but that has changed here in the recent weeks. Are you going to ramp it up going forward here as we head toward Iowa?
Well, I've always responded to his attacks throughout the whole campaign. I've held him accountable on different things. But I do think when he's saying things like in Iowa the other day that, well, you know, he couldn't follow his campaign promise to have Mexico build the border, pay for the border wall, because there was, quote, no legal mechanism he could have used to have Mexico pay. So he's rationalizing that failure. The problem is that was his main campaign promise. I was at the rallies. It was fun. Everyone was cheering that. And the second thing is there actually was a way he could have done that. He could have imposed fees, and I will do this as president. You could have imposed fees on the remittances that people send to foreign countries, Mexico included.
But why wasn't this the message? Why wasn't this the message from you 2 or 3 months ago?
What's that? Well, here's the deal.
This
is just what he said. But this is just what he said a couple weeks ago that I'm responding to. And I think it's important because that was his core campaign promise. You look at what Biden's done with that border. If he had followed through and built the wall, it would have been much more difficult for Biden to get away with what's happened. I think everyone sees what's happened in Israel, and then they see people demonstrating in favor of Hamas here in the United States. And then they know there's been 7 million people that have come across the border. I think we're all very concerned about the security of this country, given that. So when he's saying that he couldn't get the job done, look, I want to send the message, I will get the job done. I'm not going to make excuses. We're done with the excuses. We've got to figure out a way to do it. And I will deal with the border. I'll have the wall. We'll take on the drug cartels, which is really what should have happened a long time ago.
Governor, got to leave it there. Thank you for your time, sir. See you in South Carolina tomorrow night.
See you later.